Everyone, we're just going to wait a few more minutes while we have some more people streaming in, and then in just a few minutes we will get started.
Is it working?
Hello, Jonathan, and with that,
Hello there.
we will just, I think it's probably time to start. Now we have all of our panelists here today. So
Right.
welcome to everyone who's joined us. Thank you so much for sharing this wet and dreary Tuesday evening with us. So I'd like to welcome two people onto the panel tonight, connected with the launch of A House Built on Love. And so we have Ed Walker from Hope into Action.
Hello, great to be here.
And we have Jonathan Aitken. So thank you so much, Jonathan. Jonathan was on a training call earlier on, and he's squeezing this in for us tonight. So we're very, very grateful that we were able to make this work tonight, Jonathan. We really do appreciate it.
No, I'm delighted. It's a great book.
Yes. Okay, so I'm going to open up with a couple of questions, and then what we'll do is we'll have Ed and Jonathan chatting probably between themselves, and I'll prompt with questions. You will see, everyone will see here that there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So if you want to post questions into the Q&A box, that would be absolutely wonderful. And then I will be picking up questions from there and putting them to the panel. So that's the very best way to make sure that your question gets asked tonight. We will also we have a code for people to get hold of the book at a slightly cheaper price on the SPCK website. So my colleague Emma is going to be popping that code in the chat box, and we will also put that up at the end of the night. So please do go ahead and buy a copy for yourself, a copy for your friends. Why in fact don't you buy a handful of copies and share them out in your church so that everyone can read this wonderfully inspiring story? So Ed, I'm going to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to start Hope into Action, sorry.
Yeah, a couple of things, probably really. I often tell the story, and it's relevant to tonight just because it is Prison Week now. We've got Jonathan Aitken here, who's amongst other things, is currently prison chaplain in London. But I tell the story of meeting someone who come out of prison that morning, and by 11 o'clock he's already drinking something pretty strong. I asked him his story. He said at the point of leaving the prison, he was full of hope and determination. A prison officer said to him, "We'll see you back here in 3 months' time." At that point, his sort of fragile self-esteem crumbled. He realized he had nowhere to go and no one to go to. And so he made a rational decision. He spent the money he got from to get 47 quid to leave prison, and he'd spent it already on a bottle. I tried to help him, nowhere would take him, and I left him with two feelings really. One, feeling very disempowered, and two, a sense of, well, why aren't churches doing more about this? Where I was standing, I could see in my mind's eye, a dozen plus churches, all of whom sing every Sunday, read the Bible during the midweek, pray the whole time. What was the point of all this worship if we weren't going to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? And I often tell that story. That was a quote from Isaiah 58, but I often tell that story and people think I got up the next day and started Hope into Action. Of course, it wasn't as simple as that. There's a period of kind of thinking, praying, I guess, journeying, reading between that and starting Hope into Action. And a really key moment there, which I can still remember, was one New Year's Eve where I read another book, a book called Pride and Perjury, which I'd also recommend, actually, a fantastic book written by Jonathan Aitken. And he told so vividly about the struggles, again, that people have. Many of whom come to faith in prison as they leave the prison gate. And if we don't meet them, as in we, the Christians, don't meet them, I can guarantee they're brilliant marketing drug dealers that meet them. You can guarantee there are other people for whom relationships aren't going to be the positive for the people leaving prison. And so, to cut a long story short, those were key things that really helped form Hope into Action at the kind of Genesis stage. Jonathan's book, meeting that man, and then we got the first house up and running. I went into prison. I met someone at the prison gate. I took him to the house. That was the first house. We now have 7, and that was in partnership with my church in Peterborough. And every single house we've opened since has been in partnership with a church. So we can now say across the country there are 79 homes being run by churches, where 10 years ago there weren't. We've got another 17 in the pipeline. And I can tell you in the last week, churches have met people, 3 people at the gate as they've left prison and taken them into a home. One in Wolverhampton, one in Northumberland, and one in Rochester. That's a pretty cool output.
That's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. 1 house to 79 houses in 10 years.
Yeah.
That's quite incredible. Jonathan, would you tell us a little bit about your story and then about your connection to Hope into Action?
Well, let's start with the second. I was invited some years ago to go and speak at a Hope in Action conference. And I'd done a bit of homework, but I was inspired tremendously by what I saw and what I learned that Hope in Action were doing. And of course, the story has grown massively since then. I think that Ed and his life and work, and now this book about his life and work, are truly inspirational. And without going into enormous detail, I think there are 3 sort of key features. First of all, the work that he does is a real Christian calling and is seriously and badly needed. And I think there's a slight implication, which is absolutely right, which is that not enough Christians, not enough Christian churches get into this work. What is the work? Well, it's reaching out to the homeless, particularly, I think, the homeless ex-offenders. And when I came to speak at Hope in Action's conference, I had no idea that I was going to be an ordained prison chaplain. It wasn't on my radar at all. But I was doing quite a bit of lay prison ministry. And I often tell people that going into prison is difficult, but coming out of prison is far, far more difficult. Because whatever good intentions men or women come out of prison with, there is often a horrendous gap between their hopes and the realities of the life they face. One of the realities being it's extremely difficult to get accommodation. And if you don't get accommodation, you start almost to fall at the first hurdle because you're tempted back into the world of crime or drug taking, whatever it was before. But Hope in Action don't just offer accommodation. The wonderful thing about Hope in Action is it also offers that invaluable Christian commodity, love. And there are people in these houses, which Ed will talk about later, I'm sure, who give wonderful support, spiritual support, emotional support, practical support, mentoring, and that very much all comes in part of the package that Hope in Action offer. The results are staggering. I've been, besides being a prison chaplain, I've been a commentator in the press and in reports written for the social justice for getting on for 20 years about the problems faced by ex-offenders. And the biggest problem which impacts society is that an astonishingly high percentage of them reoffend, and the whole cycle starts again. Hope in Action's figures, I think I'm right, Ed will correct me if I'm wrong, are just astonishing. Whereas about 70% of all ex-offenders coming out of prison reoffend within a year or two. In Hope in Action's case, people who go into their houses, 90% do not reoffend. And that is a stunning success story, which is not replicated by any other charity or charitable organization. Of course, I also love the fact that this is a book and a story which is inspired by Christian faith. The book is full of wonderful pieces of scripture, some of my favorite pieces of scripture, which inspire us. So if we wrap all this together, I want to, right from the start, give this book a 5-star rating, and I hope it'll be widely read and acted upon.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Did you want to say anything more about your story, or you covered all of that there, Jonathan? Just in case there's anyone here who's not aware.
Well known. Ed's story needs attention, but I mean, I've had an astonishing journey from cabinet minister to convict, from jail prisoner to believing Christian. Until 2 or 3 years ago, I had no intention of becoming an ordained minister, but God sometimes, when in fact the first murmurs started to say, I'd like you to get ordained. What voice is this? And if it's God's, I wanted to say to him more politely, I'm putting it now, please shut up, God, it's a very bad idea. But when God calls, he calls, and that's it. So if you put my own journey, it's certainly been a fascinating one and a transforming one, I hope. But what gives me greatest joy is being a prison chaplain who, unlike actually quite a few prison chaplains, also cares passionately about what happens beyond the gate after they come out, because that's where the big failure area is. And it's one of the few people who's really remedying that failure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Ed, tell us why you wrote the book.
Yeah, it's a funny thing why would you write a book? You have to kind of get over this strong voice in your head that says, Ed, who are you and what do you think you are? And of course I'm nothing and so on. But I think there are a few things, and I'm sure, Jonathan, you can perhaps agree. When you meet the need on the streets, when you meet the tragedy in the lives of a prisoner or a former sex worker or a refugee or someone who's a care leaver, and you hear their stories, it has a very profound impact on you. And then when you go into church on the Sunday and you find a very big a sense of a big disconnect with what's going on in the subculture that is church and the needs of the poorest just in the same community, a powerful force rises up in you that wants to join those two things together, that wants to scream from the rooftops and say, this is what the Bible means. This is why we want to get, this is what church should be doing, should be in this space, engaging with it, bringing a light into the darkness. So I think that's probably the first reason why I wrote it. And I hope if we can bring the needs of the streets into the comfort of Christian homes, that would be a great outcome. That Pope Francis talked about the gentrification of the Christian heart, in a sense that actually we can just inoculate ourselves from the pain of the poor, and that's not our calling. I passionately believe it isn't. The book will tell you very many difficult stories we've had. Any of us have worked in Hope into Action have picked up plenty of scars, so it's hopefully quite a real story. But the first point is to bring the needs of the street into the comfort of the Christian homes. I think that the second thing is to really inspire churches to believe they have something really unique and powerful and valuable that they can bring into this space. I think the danger is subconsciously we think, oh, we're only a small church, and you know that big charity down the road, it's got, you know, £1 million budget and lots of paid staff. What can we do? We feel inadequate. Well, no, we reject that. You have something that £1 million charity can't offer, and that is love. You look on the website of any homeless charity in this country and search for the word love, you won't find it, or very rarely find it. Whereas churches have this spiritual power, this social power, and just to be confident. And also, you know, you're anointed as a church to do this stuff. The very first thing the church did was to house a vulnerable woman. Penultimate command of Christ was to take this woman into your home, and that's exactly what John did out of obedience to Jesus. So it's what the church has always done, and I think we can believe and be confident that we can do something fantastic, even if you're a small church. So that's the second reason. And then I'd say the third reason really is, over the 10 years of Hope into Action, I don't for a second suggest it's all been a bed of roses. It hasn't. And I don't try and sugarcoat that. I try to be honest, but at the same time, I feel you can see that God has blown miracle after miracle after miracle through Hope into Action. And when that happens, and when you see, you know, an ex-addict of 20 years walk out of church and go, God, that was better than any drug I've ever had, you sense that heaven has kissed earth. And I guess there's a strong desire in you to want to sing and to proclaim and give glory to God for what he's done. And you know, I'm an awful singer, so this, if you like, is my way of trying to proclaim and say thank you, God. And you know, the gospel has been passed on for 2,000 years by people telling the stories of what God is doing, and that's been motivated by the Holy Spirit. And if you like, this is my inadequate way of trying to do that. Thank you, Simon.
Yeah, so and Jonathan, you're an acclaimed author. You had a glowing reference from Ed earlier on there, and you've also mentioned the fact that you would give his book a 5-star review, which is fantastic. Thank you for that. It's probably a little while ago that you actually read the book, because that was probably way back even before the start of lockdown this year.
No, I was reading it yesterday.
Oh, are you? Okay, so I'm a little bit out of date there. You've got a new copy of the book. So what did you make of it? What do you think will be the most empowering part of the story?
Well, it's kind of you to remind people that I am an author. I've got too many books under my name on the shelves, but I think there's 18 of them. And the one thing I do know about, I like to think, is sort of how to write books and how to make them interesting, and indeed how to sell them and get people to respond. Now, this book is, begin with an unusual compliment, it's really well written. And it's well written because it moves along at a brisk pace of storytelling. It's often not Ed's story, he's too modest, perhaps, but you know, the individuals who come out of prison or wherever it is and are in trouble, and all sorts of things go wrong. And then wonderful stories of donors. There's a ex-policeman who arrives and wants to put his life savings into a home which will benefit ex-offenders. And the stories are terrific. Of course, beyond the quality of the writing and the quality of the stories and the readability of it. There is a really powerful message, and this is what grabs me. All kinds of things grab me. I mean, Ed clearly loves the Psalms, and I love the Psalms, so his quotes of inspiration there are wonderful. But I think former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, somewhere in the tributes to the book, says that Hope into Action is a form of Christian outreach which is genuinely holistic. Now, that phrase needs unpacking, but too many churches, too many Christians are not truly holistic. I don't mean to say there's anything bad about them or wrong with them, but they don't see the whole Christian gospel as a whole. And part of the whole is we don't just worship, we don't just pray, we don't just sit in a cozy churchy relationship with God. We actually go out and do the things that he wanted us to do. And the most dramatic passage to me in the Bible about this is a passage in one of the last chapters of Matthew. It's called the sheep and the goats parable. And Jesus is addressing, I suspect, rather a posh audience. And to his astonishment, he sort of starts to say, well, why didn't you visit me when I was in prison? Why didn't you help me when I was in Hungary? Why didn't you clothe me when I was at my BMens and couldn't even get enough clothing? Why, when I was kind of a refugee, I'm paraphrasing here, but and I said, where were you? And the posh audience, and you can imagine them actually in a 21st century church sitting in the front pews, absolutely baffled and say, what on earth is he on about? I mean, when did I not visit you when I was in prison, Lord? When did I not feed you when you were hungry? And Jesus says, when you did it to the least of these, my brethren, brothers and sisters, you did it to me. Now, too many of us don't do enough to the least of those people who we are supposed to be reaching out to, but Hope in Action really does. And so that's why it excites me as a fellow Christian and as a prison chaplain and person who works in this field, and also as an author who knows another good author when he sees one.
It's probably worth saying, just thank you for that. It's worth saying just to honour Elizabeth, who wrote it with me, and I think she really crafted it into a story. So I did co-write it, and Elizabeth, who might be here, if you are here, thank you very much. It was a joy working with you.
Compliments to her too.
So, Ed, what's the situation out there now? What's happening out there now in terms of...
The truth is, people are still leaving prison every day in this country with no fixed abode, nowhere to go on release. And, 79 houses, some people think that's a lot. And in one respect it is. When you divide the need by 79 houses, though, you realise it's not even a fraction of what's going on out there in our country. And that's just one element of homelessness. If you can look at homelessness through many lenses, and if you look at it through, it's prison week, so we're looking at it through ex-offenders or people leaving prison. But equally, you could look at vulnerable women who've got nowhere who are suffering domestic violence. You can look at former sex workers. You can look at people struggling with mental health. You can look at refugees. You can look at care leavers. You can look at street sleepers. You can look at people in recovery from addiction. All of those people sofa surfing, all of that is the homeless situation, of which the man or woman you see on the street is just the tip of the iceberg, really. And so what's happening in our country now, in case you noticed, was a pandemic. And there is a tsunami. In May, we launched a campaign saying there is a tsunami of need that was going to land in our country. It's a perfect combination. It's the perfect storm. I don't need to tell you what all those factors are, but rising house prices, job losses, cuts to services, all those are going to hit. And since then, we've already begun to see it on our streets. I've never seen a tent outside my office before. There's a tent being erected, a makeshift camp rather, just outside here. The first wave of that tsunami is hitting. And in addition to that, night shelters are harder to make safe now. And so people are turning to housing solutions, and they are solutions we believe, and now the government is saying, and others are saying, this gives people more dignity. It gives them more safety, both from the virus and from other unwanted influences. So I honestly believe the need of homelessness is rising dramatically and will continue to rise over the next couple of years. I also think the government's, it has been cut by 10 years of austerity. It's going to continue to be cut at some stage. So you've got this sort of rising need and lowering ability to meet it. And I think this is a tremendous opportunity for the church to step into that gap. And I think the homeless need the church like never before. And if God is saying anything, and you do wonder what's God saying, maybe he's saying put less energy into Sunday and more energy into another form of worship. And so, yeah, just to summarize, the need is rising. I think this is a great opportunity for the churches to really engage with the homeless in our country. They really need you, us.
So what can an individual church do?
Well, I'd encourage you to start by getting the book, and as Alexandra said, to sort of pass that around and get that read and so on, and begin to wrestle with it. But the main thing you can do, if you can provide 5 to 10 people who are committed to loving, befriending, meeting that person at the prison gate, meeting them in the prison before they lived in prison, taking them to the home, as we did to 2 people yesterday, helping them settle in, getting them some nice food, meeting them the next day, helping them get to the probation appointment that day, all these practical things that hit someone as they leave prison, or whatever it may be. Then if you've got 5 to 10 people in your church that can commit to that, then we'll partner with you. Right now, we have over £1 million worth of investment capital that we can't spend on houses because we don't have churches coming on board. So if your church, we've got the financial capital, what we're lacking is the churches. So that's really our ask of churches. And and churches are slow decision-making bodies. They're democratic. I understand that. We understand that. So you're not going to be able to get a sign-off on this tomorrow. But if you can be the one that drives it through your church. I've never met a vicar or a church leader or a minister that said, I disagree with this theologically. I don't think we should be doing this. No one says that. Their only concern really is capacity. So if you can provide the capacity by saying, I'm keen to do this, you've got a pretty good, I'll gather, 5 people around me to get this going, Vicar. Are you in? The odds are they're like, you stand a good chance of them saying yes.
Yeah. So, sorry, I've lost my questions there now. We've got a couple of questions in the Q&A. Gavin is asking, what would you say to someone who seems to be the only person in their church who wants to house the homeless? What does that person do?
Well, it is a challenge, of course. Maybe try and get the book out to people in there, keep praying, and keep trying to inspire people. Jonathan, what would you say to that?
I think the best voices are those who have been through the prison system, come out through the gate, and have not been able to be helped with accommodation. It's not a curious thing in prison. Let me tell you an anecdote about the time when I was a prisoner. I quite often used to get asked to what were called going out parties or end of sentence parties. They were always frightful for some reason. Anyway, here we group of prisoners, and someone says, I'm going out tomorrow, and his friends organise a sort of goodbye party as he's being released. And the astonishing thing that I most remember at these parties, you'd think it ought to be celebratory parties full of joy and optimism, sentences ending. Time and time again, before the sort of trifle had been finished, people would let on that they were actually very scared of coming out. And they were fearful. And why were they fearful? Well, there are more than one reason. But one of the biggest reasons is, where am I going to live? How am I going to get started? Is anyone going to be nice to me again? And they're very, very worried. And that element of fear is dramatically reduced as soon as there's somebody do the kind of things that Coping Action is good at, to meet you at the gate, to offer you an opportunity of get into a house and so on. This is, for the life of an ex-offender, that is life-transforming stuff. And of course, it is the Christian gospel too.
Mm. And then somebody else has said, I have, and this could be anywhere, but I have an empty small cottage in a West Cumbrian village. Could it be used in the context you work in?
Yes. We always open a house in partnership with the church. So if we can get the local church to look at partnering with that house, we could do it. We've got a house in Alnwick, which is in Northumberland. That's a pretty remote place, and we've got a church there to partner with it. So why not have faith for one there? But I saw that person was anonymous. So if you wanted to send me an email, I'd love to have a conversation with you about that, and we can look to explore it.
Yeah. Then Paul asks, in the current difficult economy where house prices are likely to fall, are you concerned that people will be less enthusiastic about investing in properties for this purpose?
Yeah, the truth is I'm not. And the reason is our investors are motivated by the social impact of their investment. I'm not so foolish to say that's the only thing they're motivated by. They're not trying to maximize their yield. If they wanted to maximize their yield, they could invest in a dozen other things that will get them better yield. We give them a very small cash return. This is a safe, sound, long-term investment for most investors, and they know that and they understand it. And I never sell this, and we never have, and we never will, on it's a great investment, you're bound to get capital growth. We sell it on, you can get a really great social return on your investment because your wealth will help the homeless. You also get a spiritual return on your investment because your wealth will enable a church to engage with the homeless in a relational, holistic, gospel-centered way. And that's the main return you'll get on your investment. House prices may go up and down. It's a 5-year commitment, so you sign a business lease for 5 years, and after that you can continue and roll it on. And if someone judges that they can't do that, that's fine. And again, as I said earlier, we have over £1 million of investment pledges with us at the moment. So right now, that really isn't our problem. Our problem is how we're going to spend investment capital, not whether we're going to get any in the future.
And how long do people tend to spend in the house? How long do people stay for?
Yeah, it's a good question. Our average length of stay is 11 months. So some people bounce in and out very quickly, and that's great. But I would say to anyone listening, a good intervention, if you really want to journey with someone through the journey of out of homelessness, you should be expecting that journey to take at least 18 months. And at 2 years, we're asked, we're trying to encourage them to move on at 18 months so that by 2 years, they're no longer there where that's appropriate. But I would just say often Christians can sort of gloss over the length of time it takes for transformation. And you might have heard someone at Christian festivals who was in prison and now has got his life sorted. But there's probably a good 5 years of discipleship there. We've got a gentleman who came into our house from prison, did really well for a year, and then something tragic happened in his life. He relapsed, he went back on heroin, he's now back in prison. But we visited him again, and the church have visited him again, and we've offered him a place again when he returns. And I say that story because that gives you a sense of the reality of what you're going to go into. But also that if you want to journey with someone, it's not going to happen like that. Even if they accept Jesus into their life tonight, there is still a long amount of discipleship that is needed, and you only need to look at my heart to realize how slow I am to transform, to realize, well, it should be the same for everyone else. So I say all that to say, actually, it's right that if we want to do effective long-term work, we commit to our relationships for more than just a few days.
Yeah, this is not a fast fix, is it? This is providing someone with secure housing, which allows them to do all the things like open bank accounts, apply for jobs, become self-sufficient.
Yeah. There are massive hurdles on coming out of prison or coming out of homelessness, and those things all take time. And if you're not in a safe, secure home, all your energies, all your ingenuity, all your initiative goes on survival. And it's, how can I get through the day? How can I get my next hit? And they're using a lot of great skills just to survive, an enormous energy. Many of them will walk, dozens of miles, or plenty of miles every day, on the streets. So if you can put them in a home and they don't have to worry about that, all that energy and initiative and drive can go on getting themselves out of homelessness rather than just surviving.
We shouldn't be surprised that the journey is often quite a long one and a difficult one. When I was a prisoner, I spent an awful lot of time writing letters to my fellow prisoners. Word went round as a guy who can write, let's get him to write our love letters or anything. And so you get to know people pretty well when they're doing that kind of work. And the thing that struck me more than anything else was that a lot of these guys had, first of all, statistically, something like 90% of them came from broken homes, 40% of them had spent their youth and formative years in care homes. And time and again, I found myself talking to somebody who had never had a father who said, "Well done, son, I love you." And when you've got that gap closed, and for the first time when you come out tempted by drug dealers and this says, well, there is somebody saying, actually, we can put a roof over your head, actually, we can disciple you, we can mentor you, we can love you. But it isn't quick.
Mm. Ed, Mandy asks, what are the specific differences you see between male and female homelessness, and what connection does violence have in somebody's past?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Mandy. And I think, just dealing with that last one, we don't know the statistics of how many females on the streets suffer violence, but I often say anecdotally, our assumption is of the females in our houses that 98% at least would have suffered some form of abuse, and most of that, including physical and sexual. And that's our starting assumption, that anyone who's homeless has suffered some form of abuse, especially if they are female. Just to let people know, we have, of our 79 houses, 34 of those are females. And just to put this into context, 155 women are turned away from refuges every week in this country. That's 155 women turned away from refuges every week. And when I hear that statistic, for those, I know many of you will know this, but if you're in an abusive relationship, at the point you leave that abusive relationship is the point you are most vulnerable, because it takes enormous courage, and your partner may be most likely to be violent or even murder you at that critical kind of 2 weeks after you leave. So if you've taken the courage to leave, you've knocked on the door of a refuge and you've got a big fat no, and then you have to go back, you really are in a difficult situation. So when I think and ponder on that statistic, I think, the churches can crack this problem. If there was a church with a house in every community, we can meet that need. So that's the second thing I'd say. I think the third thing that you asked there, Mandy, was, what are the specific issues if you want to work with women? Some of the most tragic stories I've ever heard in the last 10 years have been the stories I've been privileged to hear from women and women prisoners, for sure. And I would say, many of them would have suffered profound abuse, and that comes with it many challenging behaviours, as you'd expect. But what you will have is many of them will have children, or either with them currently, so you need to be able to provide for children, or they've had children taken off them and are in care. We hear a lot about people in care in this country. We hear and have been adopted. We very rarely hear about the mothers left behind, many of whom may be really good mothers, really good people. I can vouch for how good these people are. And imagine how you would feel if your child was taken off you. How can you feel that pain in your heart? And the temptation to go back onto drugs or to start taking drugs must be enormous. So, so they may have children with them, have lost children to the care system, or they may fall pregnant while they're in your house. And all of which we have to be able to manage and support in a non-judgmental way if we are to work with women. Of course, women on the streets also suffer period poverty and are incredibly vulnerable to abuse and rape and all that sort of thing. There have been some studies of females who are in addiction on the streets, and they say the very last thing they'll ever admit to you is the fact they sold themselves in order to score drugs. And the shame attached to that will be very profound in them. And I mean, that's why it's the last thing to admit to, because, you know, shame, you don't want to admit to what you're ashamed about. And so they will very often carry enormous shame. And that's different from guilt, because, you know, if I beat up my wife, she may feel very ashamed, but she's done nothing wrong. That's not a sin. And so you need to be able to minister very sensitively into that circumstance where you can make them understand that, you know, they are worthy, that God created them in his image, and that they have innate, undiminished worth. So those are some of the things, Mandy. I hope that helps or answers your question.
Yeah. And Ed, you've touched on this before. So, Jonathan, this is from Diane. How do you personally cope when someone you support, encourage, and walk with seems to be moving forward, but then it all seems to go wrong? How does that challenge you personally?
Well, because I've experienced by now, I try very hard not to be devastatingly upset, profoundly disappointed, angry, any of these negative things, because I know it goes with the territory. And if you think of it, we all stumble and fall during our lives. So I'm not at all surprised when something, for inexplicable reasons sometimes, someone who thinks has given up drugs for good, given up crime for good, going straight in a really attractive, positive way, going to church, suddenly it all goes wrong. And if you're, I've learned not to give myself any pats on the back when I'm a mentor. I think it's God's work, and I think God forgives sinners, God forgives failures. And very often when you dig into it, you find there are some quite complicated reasons why people relapse, or whatever it is. It isn't that they're deliberately trying to kick over the card table just when they start holding one or two aces. It happens. It goes with the territory, and it's a test of one's really Christian commitment. Instead of getting cross or thinking I'm going to walk away from prison ministry, I'm going to do this again. Joe let me down so badly. He didn't let me down. He let himself down. And how do you repair it? And I must say, over the years, I've very often you talk about second chances. Those of you who seem to have had about 7 chances. And I think Jesus, when asked one moment, said, "How many times you 70 times 7?" He said. So but the exciting thing that all this is, Ed believes, and I believe, it's God's work, and it's very, very exciting to be doing it. And if there are failures along the way, well, that's Christian life and real life.
Mm. Ed, do you have any words of encouragement for anyone who worries about how they might feel when that happens?
Well, firstly, I'd say in a sense that shows you care. I think if you want to love someone, and we're saying we do want to love people, then when you love someone, you make yourself vulnerable. I'm sure we've all had a broken heart at some stage in our lives. I think God loves us and we let him down and he feels vulnerable. So I think in a sense, that's part of the deal. If you want to work in this space, you're going to have your heart broken. We've sung glibly many times, break my heart for what breaks yours. But the reality is it does hurt when it happens. And one of the challenges for people in this work is to continue to hope sufficiently that actually you let yourself be vulnerable again, because that you know that your heart may get broken. I think that's part of the deal. The other thing I would say is sometimes I think we have false expectations of what is realistic for our, we call them tenants, people you're mentoring might be able to achieve. If we go to New Wine or somewhere like that, and you hear someone who was in addiction and is now not, and isn't Jesus wonderful, if that's all you hear of their story, and you don't hear the relapse and over the 3 to 5 years, there's a danger that subconsciously you're building up a false expectation, A, of what is possible for that gentleman or lady you're working with, B, of what God can do, and C, what you can do. Even Jackie Pullinger will say, after someone gets released from addiction, you have 2 years of hard work where you have to rewire their brain. So I would just say, hope, believe that God can cure anyone from anything at any time, but also understand that the journey of healing is a very long one. When Jesus healed that homeless man in Mark 5, who had all those demons, he placed him in his community, surrounded by relationships. And over time, he didn't turn into a saint overnight. He would have had plenty of issues. Over time, the healing occurred through relationships. So have realistic expectations of what's possible for that person to achieve as well might be a helpful tip.
Yeah. So Ed, how can you get your message to every church in the country?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. Slowly, perhaps not. I mean, we're trying to push it out there as much as we can. We are passionate about this, and I guess anyone listening or feeling inspired, it can do it via word of mouth. Most of our leads do come from word of mouth, and I suppose this book, one of its main aims is to inspire people. And if you felt able to buy the book, Christmas, half-term presents, whatever, give it to people. If that will be the catalyst to try and get people inspired, then do. But yeah, we're trying our best. I suppose is our answer.
Yeah, so that was from Louise, and Louise also has a question from Jonathan, who would just like to know whether did becoming a Christian move you on the political spectrum at all?
Not in the way most people think. I mean, I haven't become, sort of being a conservative, I haven't become a Marxist or even a member of New Labour. So things haven't changed particularly. I certainly would be prepared to vote for any political party now, which I wasn't while I was there in politics. But it has changed my attitudes quite a lot. I mean, I don't think I was ever kind of quite a lock them up and throw away the key sort of Tory backwoodsman. But I've certainly had some harsh and judgmental attitudes somewhere in my psyche. And I hope that I have changed a lot of attitudes and certainly much more understanding than I used to, people with all kinds of problems. Certainly much more tolerant of human weaknesses. I had plenty myself, but I mean, of other people's human weaknesses. And so the answer is, in terms of not political labels, which am I supporting the green, the red, the blue, whatever it is, but have I thought much more deeply and changed my thoughts on a lot of the big issues? The answer is yes.
Yeah. Somebody who's anonymous has asked Ed specifically, is the price of housing in London a challenge to setting up homes in London?
Yes. The nearest we've come to a house in London has been an empty curate's house. So yes, of course it is. If you could buy a house in Northumberland for 100,000, whereas you'd be fairly well pushed to get one for 600,000 in London. So of course that's a challenge. That said, there's more money in London. There is, tens of thousands of homes in London. There are large housing associations in London. We have had housing associations in Ipswich give us a house. So I'm ever hopeful that the Church of England itself has lots of assets in London. So I'm still hopeful that it will happen. And we're in conversation with people in Bexley and Bromley at the moment. We're in conversations with someone in Ashford, which is inside the M25. So we are, and Epsom. So yes, I'm hopeful that maybe this time next year we might have 3 to half a dozen.
So Celia asks, we have a house with Hope Interaction in the Black Country. We're also prison volunteers. We lead sessions in the chapel when there's no lockdown. We know the need for care at the gate, but their understanding is that while we're visitors in a prison, we can't have any contact with those who come out into the community. She asks, Jonathan, is it possible for you to clarify anything about that or suggest any solutions, as they particularly want to be able to do both locally in Wiltshire?
I feel a bit like tearing my hair out in sympathy with the questioner, because they've run into, in my view, is one of the silliest rules in prison service. We've got filing cabinets full of rules, and this seems to be a very bad one, because of course it is a good thing for friendship and care and so on to continue after someone comes out of prison. If you met somebody in a visiting hall and you're having communication with them, what on earth is the logic for saying you must never speak to them again? And I run into this, even myself as a chaplain, I'm strictly speaking not supposed to go on mentoring people after they come out of prison. Luckily, there's a way around it, which is that provided you declare this interest, as it's called, and fill in a form, chaplains, okay, then it's quite, it's all right. But I think a person like our caller has probably been told the rules by some well-meaning prison officer, and they are the rules, but they make no darn sense at all for people who are interested in the rehabilitation offenders. The rehabilitation offenders should at its best start in prison. I often say to charities, don't just turn up at the gate, get to know your inmate in prison, and then it's a sort of continuous flow. So there are some rules around. I hope sooner or later they'll have the sense to change them. But I think these are rules which are absolutely should be changed.
Yeah, an example of a rule that's sent to try us all, really. So Ed, can you describe a little about how Hope Interaction supports a church in running a house?
Yeah, sure. So if your church said, yes, we'd love to house, the homeless with Hope Interaction. Obviously, before it gets to that point, one of us can come and speak. We can do a lot to try and help that church make the decision. We can meet with people, we can explain it, and so forth. But what does that church sign up to, and what do they get from us? Well, first of all, if you don't have the investment capital, we will find the investment capital and buy a house in the community of the church. Second of all, the church will provide 5 to 10 volunteers. We will come and train those volunteers so they're able to befriend effectively and wisely the tenants in the houses. I love that verse from, I think, Ephesians says, may our love abound more and more with depth and knowledge of insight. The sense that our love can be informed by knowledge and it will improve with knowledge. So we try to impart some of that. And then we have an empowerment worker professional who will work alongside that group. So here's the group of 5 to 10 people, and we have a professional, and they will guide the whole church and that group through the journey with the tenant of their tenancy. So that starts at the referral stage. Then it goes on to the assessment stage where the church begin to meet and build a relationship, as Jonathan was saying, ideally before they leave prison, if it's a prisoner. And then before they go into the house, they've already established a relationship. And then through the ups and downs of their tenancy, You have a professional that can do a lot of the hard work. So we do the tenancy, we do the fire regulations, we do the rent collection. So the church doesn't have to worry about that. The church can focus on its core competency, which is prayer, love, discipleship, befriending. And together we provide the professional excellence, you provide the kind of spiritual passion. It's a powerful combination. And yeah, all that is sort of wrapped up in a SLA between us and the church. And there's boring stuff in there about GDPR that you've got to think through, but we take care of all the kind of tenant information. You don't have to worry about that. Confidential information, we've got that covered. You can focus on, we'll train you, and you can just focus on doing what churches do best.
And how is the connection with the potential ex-prisoner made in the first place? How do they come to upon someone's radar?
Yeah, well, we'll get a referral. We'll build a relationship with the prison. The gentleman that moved in from Northumberland yesterday, there was our team there, and the church there built a relationship with the prison in Northumberland. They spoke to him sometimes on the phone because of COVID. You're not allowed to visit now. The one that moved in Northampton, I think they spoke to him on the phone every week leading up to his release, and that's part of the assessment phase. And then you make the decision, you continue to stay in contact, you meet them at the gate, you take them to the house. So yeah, we're a professional organisation. So if you go to your local prison, they're always worried that you're a bunch of do-gooder Christians, high on passion, low on skill. Whereas if you can say I'm doing this with Hope into Action's hat on, they look at our website, they've seen we've won awards, they see we've got 79 houses, instantly they go, oh, okay, you're not a bunch of Muppets. So that just helps open that door and mean they're more likely to trust you with their referrals. We've got leaflets and all that kind of stuff. We've got a professional referral form, all those kind of things that mean we do it well in a way that's honouring to God. And, we want to be as good as any agency out there that's working with people. And we want to never lose our spiritual edge and believe that prayer can have powerful results, but we want to worship God with all our mind as well. So that's a long way of saying we get referrals from the prison.
It's worth saying that inside a prison, there are some wonderfully dedicated people who on the whole get largely unsung for the work they do for prisoners and their future. And there's a resettlement office in a prison. There are people there who long to connect up with good charities. And it's perfectly true. Once you establish a relationship and you realize the people you're dealing with on the other side of the wall are not a bunch of Muppets and Ed Strays, but they're professionals and good. This is an answer to prayer to the prison administrators themselves who long to find those kind of connections.
Yeah.
Prison
Charles,
unsung heroes. They are often brilliant. They do brilliant work, prison officers and resettlement teams. They're passionate about their job. Most of them, most people, they really want their prisoners to be housed well.
Yeah. So Charles says the move from assisted or sheltered accommodation into independent living can also present great problems for the individual. Do you have any support programs to assist the move of a resident onto independent living?
Yeah, I mean, if a tenant comes into one of our houses, we've got sort of 8 areas we track. How are they maintaining their tenancy? Are they paying their bills? Can they pay them online? Have they got a bank account set up? All of which will have, and lots of other things. Can they get a job? If they get a job, do they pay the rent to us directly? Can we get them to pay it online? Because that's the way the world works. So the skills you need to be able to survive in the world. So from the day they move in, our aim is to try and prepare them for more independent living. And at the point of move out, I often talk about when I left home, suddenly I worked out how an iron worked. I suddenly realized there was a washing machine we needed to turn on. So I suddenly sort of, if you excuse the phrase, sort of manned up a little bit and had to take responsibility for myself. So it's important that we encourage them out and to take responsibility. And the ideal is that at the point of move out, they've got more resilience due to the relationships they built up with church. So they can continue to call someone up. I've still got one or two people up that call me up when they're in trouble, or a girlfriend's dumped them or something like that. And all I do is I provide a little bit more resilience in their life to cope with the bumps of life. And so hopefully that resilience that comes from secure, loving, genuine relationships also helps sustain them into that tenancy, because they will get dumped by a girlfriend, or they will lose their job, or they will, do you see what I mean? Benefits will get cut for whatever it is. That's their reality that we need to, it's never a sort of fairy tale ending.
No, life isn't like that. So somebody asks, and I'll put this to Jonathan first, but Ed, you can probably speak into this as well. When the going gets tough, what do you do to keep your heart full?
When the going gets tough in one's own life. Is that the question?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, of course, when the going gets tough, we all react in different and often human ways. But personally, I always remember someone saying to me, a disciple is a disciplined person. And the first discipline in my life, and sure it's in Ed's life too, is that I spend the first hour of every day, and some of the evening as well, but praying. And one of the things one prays for, wants a sort of quick list of from the list of the fruits of the Spirit, or the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians chapter 5. But it ends up rather interesting that in saying faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Now, self-control, when things are going wrong, is a challenge. Perhaps I've got a low boiling point, but I often, under pressure, like to get cross or get angry or get shouty. I hope I'm eliminating those faults. But if you are centered in prayer, centered in feeling that you're trying to do God's work, whatever aspect of it is, but certainly the work that Ed is doing is absolutely rooted and centered in God's teaching. This, I think, is a kind of good compass to steer by, and it keeps you from going off into lack of self-control or anger or cracking up. But there are spiritual disciplines which I think work in very practical ways for challenging situations, such as when everything does go pear-shaped.
Yeah, Ed.
Yeah, I can't claim to pray for an hour every morning. Just got to be honest about that. I'm sorry, but I am inspired that you do, Jonathan. I kind of read the question a slightly different way. What do you do when things go wrong in our work? Because what I would say is, when anything goes wrong in the work, I'm always battling this voice in my head that says, "Ed, you're useless." And I only read this recently, but the very first thing the devil says is, "Did God really say that?" And it's a very clever question. And I guess that question comes into my head in many forms. Did God really call you to start this charity? Are you really doing any good? Did you really help that person? Have you really done this, that? And he said the same to Jesus, actually. If you are the Son of God, he never kind of tells you you're not. He just plants these subtle doubts in your mind. And, you can call it mental toughness, or you can call it taking every thought captive. But I would say I regularly have to identify those thoughts for what they are, and to try and boot them into touch in often with swear words. So yeah, I don't know if that helps anyone, but that's just something I've noticed in myself, and I've found in the Bible. So recognizing that's what it may be, it might help.
Yeah, so David asks, what if my church is in an area where Hope into Action isn't working yet?
Great, we'd love to work there. You get in touch with us. I don't know where you are, David, but we have a bit like Food Bank or Street Passers, that they franchise out their model. They replicate it through franchising. So we would basically replicate our model through your church. We'd train your church up, and you would operate under our model, under our brand. But the test of franchising is, is it the same quality of service wherever you are? Are we doing the essential elements of home interaction we like to think are occurring in every single church that runs a home for open interaction? So every single tenant gets the same experience, every single church gets the same experience. So in short, we'd love to meet you, we'd love to connect with you, we'd love to work with your church and get it up and running in that area.
Okay, another quite specific question. How have your regular income donations been impacted by COVID?
Regular income, in terms of the amount that people have given to us on a monthly basis, is being fairly static. We've lost a few, but not as many as we feared. So on that respect, it's okay. I think we do fear sort of, if you like, the economy is being buttressed, isn't it, by this sort of false support of furlough and all these other loan schemes. Mm-hmm. So when that is withdrawn, 4.5% is the unemployment rate today, I think. But if that were to continue, that as that shockwave continues to hit through the economy, we are worried, I suppose, about what might happen to some of those givers.
Sarah says that she's seen someone called Ian has said on Twitter that he's unable to join us this evening because he's working. Apparently, Ian's story is in the book. Is it possible for you to share Ian's story?
I think the story of Ian, which I think I know, of course, all the names of the books are changed. So the Ian I'm thinking of is a great guy who I like very much, who I met on the streets, and after we started, and I knew him from before, and I said, "How are you, Ian?" And he said, "I'm in my lowest point. I'm drinking 26 cans of beer a day." And I said to him, well, to cut a long story short, he moved into one of our houses. We gave him some tough love to start with. He had to really earn that place. So he said, well, if you want our houses, you have to do X or Y because you need to show us that you really want this house. He is now, I think, 3 or maybe 4 years sober. He's moved on from our house. He is married. He's working as a support worker somewhere. So I think that's the Ian that's referring to. He's a great guy. I like to count him as a friend. And it's a privilege to have seen him on what is a tremendously difficult and courageous journey.
Okay. Kerry asks, is it possible for Hope Interaction to house an individual who has no recourse to public funds or is unable to pay rent? How would that work?
Yeah, so asylum seekers, we have houses for asylum seekers, and we put them, basically we put 4 in a house and one of them we make for asylum seekers. So effectively we subsidise it, we give them free rent, and we try and work with them to get the legal rights to be able to have a right to remain and therefore claim their rent. So that's what we do. We do mainly that in Wolverhampton. But that's we've got that model, so we can share it if you're interested in that.
Okay, and I think this is more of a comment. Anne says your experiences prior to Hope Interaction sound like they're very interesting, so she'd be interested to read more about those. I'm not quite sure where would be the best place for those. Let's see how this book sells. We need this to sell lots and lots of copies, and then Ed can write the follow-up and tell us a bit more about his story. So we're coming to the end of our time now. Jonathan, is there anything that you wish you had been asked? Or is there anything in the context of your connection with Hope Interaction, anything you would like to say at this point?
Well, I think perhaps the most important thing I can say is, first, in practical terms, Hope in Action reaches out to fill a desperate need. Every day I see men getting released out of prison, some of them rather good men, full of energy, full of hope, and their hope gets dashed and deferred when they run into enormous problems, particularly on the accommodation front. And if that problem could be solved, it would help to change the lives of so many people. So there's a desperate need out there. The thing I love about Hope in Action is its source of inspiration. And it's completely unashamed in a sort of secular age when we're very mealy-mouthed about faith and commitment to the Christian gospel. There is Hope in Action beating the drum with enthusiastically as sort of Paul might have beaten it in Ephesus or somewhere. He's got a real message here. This is God's work. This is inspired by this or that bit of scripture. We're there because we love our neighbors. And I find that combination of the practical need and the practical reality and the spiritual inspiration really thrilling. And that's why I'm so pleased to endorse this book with enthusiasm and praise.
Thank you. Ed, same point to you. Is there anything that you wish you'd been able to talk about tonight so far?
No, I just to say thank you for being here. We're really touched, and thank you for your support, every single one of you that is here. And yeah, do keep praying for us. Do keep supporting us. Do keep buying the book. Get the cheap off SPCK. They are great. It's a tough time if you're a publisher now, so why not? Keep that £1 to let them have it rather than take the code if you can afford it, and buy as many as you can, because SPCK have got a great mission and vision, and that we need them to keep going in this Christian world as well. So buy as many books. You're helping us. You're helping them. Give them out, and we'll all be winners.
Thank you for that, Ed. Alan just asks how many people were at this meeting. So I think I counted at peak 59 people listening in to the 4 official panelists here. So yeah, I can echo what Ed said. This is a terribly tough time to be in publishing. It's not the wisest of career choices at the moment, with bookshops across the country closed and reduced footfall. But I work at SPCK because it's a wonderful organisation to work for, and as well as Ed's wonderful book, we have many other books full of inspiring stories and theological teaching. So please do come to spckpublishing.co.uk and have a look, have a browse at our catalogue. So as a reminder, the code to get an extra £1 off, because every little does help, is House1 on the website. That's there in the chat box. So please do use that code. Feel free to use it. And you don't have to buy from us. You can buy from your local bookshop. You can buy from another online retailer. We really don't mind. We just want this book to get into people's hands, to be read, and for people to be touched by the stories that are in it. So with that, I'm going to say thank you so much to Jonathan for your time this evening. And thank you to Ed for everything that you've done with Hope into Action, with this book, with those 79 houses that are out there so far. And let's hope we can come back in 10 more years and there can be a few more noughts on the end of that figure. That would be amazing. So thank you all so much for being with us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been great.